well, thanks everyone for joining. Welcome to February's edition of the Data-Driven Seminar. It's my pleasure to introduce David Bortz. We're very fortunate to have him speaking here today. So David is a professor right now in applied math and computer science at University of Colorado Boulder. A lot of people are in this group, I'm sure, are familiar with his work on WENDy, which is now implemented in PySyndy package as well. So people can get started on that. You may have heard this in the context of, apparently, brings us quite a bit of advantages when we try to apply a lot of these tools to the regime of noisy data and such. So I'm really looking forward to hearing more about these methods. And with that, please take it away, David. Thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, thank you very much for the invitation to speak here. It's a honor and privilege to talk with everyone in the AI Institute here. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. Let's see, is this coming through now?
Yep.
Okay, great. Okay, so I'm going to talk today about our work. So this is joint work with Dan Messenger, who was a graduate student in my group and is now a postdoc here. And we have been working on the weak form for system identification. And I mean that in a sort of broad sense of both equation learning and parameter estimation. And the phrase surprising is going to keep coming up in this talk because there's several times where I will admit that the results that we got were actually quite surprising. That helped us a lot in understanding how to make these methods even better. So all of the code that generates this is all available at the website. It is called MathBioCU. My training is in applied analysis, computational mathematics. I took a detour for about 20 years and used a lot of that in applying to biological systems, but this is kind of coming back to the roots of looking at core computational methods in applied math. Okay, so still says MathBioCU on the name though. All right, so let me just dive into it. So this is the group right now. So Dan started with me about 2019, and this was when we came up with the weak form idea and has been off to the races since then. And so April started last year with me, and this is the group right now that we're working on this together. Okay, so I'm going to actually start in a little bit of a broader perspective because I feel like it's important to keep some of this in basically it's in context of what we're really trying to do here. And as I said, I've been doing math biology for a long time, and math biology or any other types of modeling, this is what we learn and which we train people to do, is that they start off with you want to solve some sort of an equation. Frequently this is a differential equation, sometimes stochastic, whatever, but this is the general form where you have some time evolution and then an operator on the right side. We assume, that there's some sort of data associated with this, and frequently it's, normally distributed, additive, Gaussian. That's usually the nice case. There's obviously many other situations you can come up with. We propose, you talk to an expert in the field, the people who are modeling experts. They know, okay, well, we should really be using some sort of logistic term to describe this, or mass action, or a Michaelis-Menten, or some other type of relationship. Maybe there's a flux term in here that is talking about the gradient in particles flowing from one place to another. But this operator here, this is the modeling, the nature of mathematical modeling, is that we create all of these operators, and we of course want to solve for some vector parameters. This is central to the scientific discoveries, finding these parameters that work. And what do we tell people? We say, okay, well, you really need to compare the output or the solution to your equation with your data. Problem, of course, is that frequently you come up with these nonlinear models. You can't do that. Right, you have an approximation that is great, but this is a lot of what applied math is about. Is coming up with a this people make their professions and their career on coming up with a good way to make sure that this solution is close to this solution. But it's important to realize that that's what we're doing here. This is frequently we solve these nonlinear least squares problems, maximum likelihood, and compare the data with the output to the model. And so let's keep keep this in mind, that this is how we've been doing this, and we've been very successful at doing this for a very long time. But you can even go further if you start at the interface with statistics, and there's ways to say, am I really capturing the nature of the data best? And there's all sorts of model selection criteria, information criteria, F-test, Colbeck-Liebler, AIC-BIC, minimum description length. There's minimum message length. There's many different ways, from computer science, information theory, statistics, to try to say what is the best model, and to try to help you choose and go back and refine what's your operator here that you should be using. And so what I am advocating here, and what our group is really pushing on, what Dan and I have been really advancing here, is trying to get around some of this. That there are some serious roadblocks here that we all kind of pretend are not there in some sense. And so here's what I mean. So let's talk about this proposal part. All right, so here's a project I worked on 5 years ago. So it has microbial fuel cells, okay? Not really important what's going on here, except that it's bacteria, they're living in a little dish. And the interesting part is, if you create the bacterial communities correctly, you can actually get them to create electricity. Via methanogenic, electroactive, and the whole idea was to create a little jar of bacteria that you put wastewater in, and it gave you electricity. That was the whole idea. We came up with a very large ODE. This is just a part of it, this ODE system. And then, of course, you have to connect it to the electrical current. And so it's actually a differential algebraic equation. It doesn't really matter what this is. We spent a lot of time on it, trying to come up with all of these things. Our experimenter gave us data with beautiful confidence intervals. And our model, he was super excited because, this was the closest anybody had gotten to it. But we were, disappointed. Anytime you see, a bias consistently, like that blue line is consistently below your red line outside your confidence intervals, you're like, my model is not really capturing something about what's going on in the dynamics here. And, we wrote a couple of papers on this, of trying to figure out ways to get there. But at the end of the day, we kind of had a wrong-ish model, right? We're not really capturing everything here, even though we have the general trend. And you can spend your career refining and refining and refining. So that's one thing to keep in mind, that a lot of the times as we get more data about biological systems, more data about any system, we are going to demand more realism from these models and accuracy. Because you can, that's sort of a side note, but we did some bifurcation analysis. And what if we did it for the wrong model, right? I mean, we went through this, we showed that, if you have the flow rate, volume rate, there's sort of these manifolds that are stable solutions where you could be producing constant current. There are actually pretty small windows where these things happen. But what if we had the wrong model? But this is something to sort of keep in mind. The next thing, that is sort of the elephant in the room. A lot of the times, we don't usually consider the impact of numerical discretization on our entire modeling endeavor. Take a chemotaxis-like model here, okay? It has alpha and beta. These are two perfectly reasonable parameters we'd want to identify. Let's create artificial data, IID Gaussian, and let's try to identify alpha and beta. It's a one-dimensional PDE, so we should be able to do this. But every time we propose a new parameter, we're going to have to do a forward solve, right? And so we need to think about that. You can show pretty straightforward. I mean, these sort of advection equations are pretty, you need to be careful how you do these. If you just use upwind, lax Wendroff, beam warming, all sorts of upwinds, flux limiters, the flux limiters seem to come out okay. Sorry, just to be clear, the red line is the initial condition, so it's a step function that should then be relaxing, and whatever the material you have should be flowing into the gap here. But you can very easily see that depending upon which numerical scheme you choose, you can get something that, even with a small step size, this is probably not what you think is really going on. You're having instabilities here. And one can make an argument that says, okay, well, you need to know enough about solving the system to come over here and use this flux limiters. But a lot of the times practitioners of this may not have this level of knowledge of this system. And so when do you being able to detect when you encounter, these little wiggles down here that are going negative, or these oscillations? That's not something that's a very well explored field. And you can actually even see this, even if you use the best numerical solver, as you change the resolution. This is the confidence interval box for your parameters, and X is the true parameter. You can see that as you crank down the step size, as you get it smaller and smaller, sure, eventually the final two boxes actually do contain the true answer. but how can you detect where you are in this range? I mean, this is just a one-dimensional PDE, and we're used to trying to solve much more complicated PDEs. This is kind of an elephant in the room that we don't talk about. We say, okay, well, just take your step size small enough, or talk to a numerical analyst. But this is exactly, this relationship is not entirely clear. So how to choose a model, numerical problems, how to choose the best model. That's also it feels like you have to really use a this is a very complicated tool to use. Like the way you can do this, and I did this back in 2006. Here's an example from HIV Dynamics. Okay, so this is time versus viral load, and you can see very clearly when somebody gets given a protease inhibitor, the concentrations of the virus in their drugs, their bloodstream just drops off. Well, what is the best model for this? Right? You can eyeball it and say, well, it kind of looks like a constant and then an exponential decay-ish. But mid-90s, there were some people, Alan Perelson, David Ho, who was Time Man of the Year, they came up with a two-dimensional ODE for a paper that has, like 5,000 or 10,000 citations now. It's one of the fastest cited papers in history. And so everybody started proposing, say, well, you don't have the correct model. You need to include latent cell dynamics. You need to include follicular dendritic cells, all these types of arguments. So we came in and we said, all right, what about model selection criteria? Can we bring some order to this? And all of these are, at the end of the day, the information criteria perspectives are goodness of fit, not the log of the likelihood. In the standard normal distributed error case, this is just the least squares. And then there's a measure of statistical complexity. If you're using AIC, your measure of statistical complexity is the number of parameters. Somehow that felt wrong to me when I was using a differential equation. So we were looking more at sensitivity equations, and basically this is a ratio between algebraic and geometric multiplicity of the eigenvalues of the sensitivity equation or sensitivity matrix. So there's ways to go beyond just looking at AIC with the number of parameters, but it gets very complicated. And this was a very computationally intensive paper to do. At the end of the day, you can get results that say, given a whole bunch of different models that have been published in the literature, I can rank them. But using different model selection criteria, then you get into what are you actually trying to rank for? It's just, it gets messy, and you are now at the mercy of saying, I need to create a set of candidate models, and I need to fit each individual one of those models before I can then go rank them. Okay, this is a hugely laborious process and is highly dependent upon the numerical error in your ODE solver. It is highly dependent upon the numerical error in your optimization routines. Okay, I actually have a paper talking about that too, but I just wanted to sort of point out that these are things that the agenda and the data-driven modeling that has happened in the last 10 years has really tried. It's really at its core addressing some of these issues. Okay. This was the best model. It's just a simple ODE model ended up being the one that was best. But so let's go beyond this. Let's go beyond this forward solve based parameter fitting, this forward solve based things, because this is in some sense it's saying, if you want to identify parameters, if you want to identify your equation, and the first thing you do is say, well, let's simulate the model. It's like almost like now you've gone from one problem to two problems, right? Now you have an additional problem of trying to figure out how to solve the equation. Let's see if we can get around that, okay? And it turns out this idea has been around a little bit. In 1969, Richard Bellman actually wrote a 3-page paper that not really well cited because, and then there's a reason for this. So he basically he didn't do SINDy, but what he did was say, let's plug in the data to our equation. Let's assume we have a linear in the parameters, the right-hand side, just a linear combination, exactly like what we frequently do nowadays. And he said, let's discretize the derivative. And then he mumbles something about maybe using orthogonal polynomials, and that's the end of the paper. So it does not acknowledge the existence of noise. It does not acknowledge, these the things that we would need to think about, and we do nowadays with more data. But this idea of just plugging in the data and actually going after the problem you care about, which is identifying those parameters and later on learning the equation. This is the way to think about it. Okay, so what did he do? This is pretty standard ideas here. That at least nowadays they're very standard ideas. But at the time, it had seen very little impact. But come up with your right-hand side, which is some approximation of the derivative, come up with your G matrix, which is, evaluation of all your, the terms you know about or potential terms, evaluated each of the time points, and you're back in a nice regression land. And the reason why this is so powerful, we understand this. This is an equation. It's AX equals B. Now, whether or not we're solving AX equals B or doing the minimizing the residual and solving it in a least squares sense, we are very good at this. This is the benchmarks they use on the top 500 supercomputers, right? Being able to solve these kinds of problems in the linear algebra. So it's really, it's been sitting there and we have not paid attention to it for a long time because we've been very concerned about solving our equations. There was a couple papers in the 80s where they tried some extensions of this. There were some people in statistics, Ramsey, Hooker, and Datner, that have all done versions of this with more modern implementations. But it really hasn't taken on because there's always this concern about either projecting it onto these orthogonal polynomials or splines or something, and that introduces its own problems, right? When you do this, you're actually introducing incorrect information into your problem that you're trying to solve. So there's been a lot of reasons over the years why this hasn't caught on until more recently. So I'm sure that many people in this Zoom call know this work very well, but I'll just sort of briefly go over it and highlight some of the things that I really think are pretty substantial and why this has had such a huge impact here. Is that it's taking something similar to what Bellman did, just plugging in the equation and just evaluating it at the data. Which, when I've explained this to people who are, senior faculty in applied math departments, they're like, this doesn't make any sense. Why would you plug this in? I'm like, well, that's the whole point. Is this advances things, and you are now getting this W that surgically goes in and extracts the terms that you want. And this is this main jump that goes away from just plugging it in, but also having this penalty here. That really makes this really take it to the next level of learning equations. And we all know this, that if you have great data, if you have high resolution data, finite difference, go ahead, that's fine. This will work just perfect. But we also know that if it's noisy, and as that noise gets worse, this is not going to go well. That's just the way it is. And moreover, how do you deal with shock waves, right? What if you have some sort of an equation that has a shock in it, right? If you're trying to learn that equation, well, you're going to have some issues at the actual shock, right? So, all right. So that's all the lead up. Here we are now with what our group has pushed out, and so. If you're not familiar with multi-index notation, all this is on the left is the time derivative, and this is all the different ways that you could want to write down other derivatives, okay? So why are we doing this in the weak sense? Well, it's because we don't want to try to evaluate the derivative exactly. We have data, and so we multiply it by a test function that's compactly supported, so we can do integration by parts and just pull all those derivatives off of the data, put them on the test function. So instead of like if you think about convolving with, say, a normal distribution or some sort of Gaussian regression, like you're basically smoothing data with some sort of a Gaussian and convolving it with that. This is like that, only we're convolving it with a function that when you multiply it, it's giving you the derivative. Okay, so instead of giving you the value of the function, it's giving you the derivative of the function at that point, after it's been smoothed and stuff in a sort of appropriate way. So the whole point now is that we don't have derivatives. We have derivatives on the test functions that are, of course, you can pre-compute. But again, here we are back in our nice regression land. Okay, and this just makes things so much nicer, right? Because you can actually solve this very fast on a computer. Okay, so briefly, we weren't the first to do this. There's 3 papers from 2019, some people from over in Europe. There's the Grigoriev group at Georgia Tech, and then Krishna Garikapati at the University of Michigan. These are all, excellent. However, these are not applied mathematicians. And so we have a very different perspective on this, in the sense that once we see something that works like this, we really want to dive in and really understand what it is that is giving us some amazing robustness and accuracy in these reconstructions. And so we have about 7 things that have come out or are coming out: ODEs, PDEs, interacting particle systems of first order, online learning, and interactive particle systems of second order. We have a fairly extensive theory paper that just got posted, and we are doing some now parameter estimation that I'll talk about briefly at the end. That is supposed to be, we will hopefully be submitting in the next week. But let me show you. So I am making a bold claim about robustness, right? So let's see. ODEs here. This is where we started. And to be honest, we just kind of took some of the benchmark problems that were in the PNAS paper from 2016. So this is just a lock of Volterra, 10% noise, and the weak form will get you down to 0.1% error. This seems pretty nice. You can also do Lawrence, 10% noise, 0.8% error. So sorry, this is relative error in the coefficients of the parameters, the norm of it. So 0.8% error, it's pretty reasonable. It's a chaotic system here, right? So even after you get your parameters, it's pretty much guaranteed you try to forward solve, you're going to miss some things, but you're still doing pretty well if you need to know the parameters. So this is a hard problem, right? If you're trying to do projections and predictions here, but anyway, let's see. Now here's the thing. I am in no way claiming that we have conquered the curse of dimensionality in any stretch of the imagination. What I will tell you, though, is we have very conclusive results that say this method of weak form works better for PDEs than it does for ODEs. And the reason that we sort of the intuitive idea about that is that you're basically adding more integrals, right? You have more coupling between the data points that you're taking here. So for example, in this case here, so this is Burger's equation. So this is a shock developing problem. And so what you see over here is this shag carpeting is a one realization with 50% noise. And so when I say 50% noise, what I mean is looking at the ratio of basically the variance of the noise to the variance in the data. But so this is pretty fuzzy, right? And this is the ranges are from 4,000 to 4,000, and then it's going forward in time, 0 to 4. The shock forms at t equals 2, with your sort of sloped initial condition, and it's really interesting. So these are the noise levels. This is the maximum coefficient error over several hundred experiments. So each experiment, we will learn the equation for that experiment, and this is the worst error. And so at 25% noise, 0.5% error. The identification rate is the fraction of those equations that are being learned correctly. So this form here is the only thing you're getting. And we have, of course, started with some large library of tens to hundreds of terms, and this is yeah, that's an different issue of sort of the library creation. But, for the most part, we come at this from the perspective of, that library. You're not going to put a u to the 100th power in there, right? You probably have some intuition about the types of terms that are in there. And so being able to do this for, a bunch of different combinations of derivatives and polynomials and maybe some trig functions up to, say, order 5 or 6 is probably going to work. It's probably going to be sufficiently to cover, at least right now. That's a research question that we're looking at. But so anyway, so let's look at the results here. So identification rate is perfect all the way up to, you get to 50%, 100% noise. You can still recover 99% of those systems correctly, and you're still just getting 2.5% error in this -1 here. It's not exactly -1. It's close that you're recovering. Okay. Kuramoto-Sivacinski. This is a spatiotemporal chaotic system. It has some particularly difficult things. I mean, try to take a fourth derivative with just data and do finite difference or even smoothing on that. You will find that is a very challenging thing to do. If you, however, have the weak form with the fourth derivative placed on your test function, that's not so bad. This is also a little, polynomial, take a derivative of that. We're able to get 100% identification rate at 50% noise on this problem here. Okay, so this is, and it starts, at a certain point, of course, this will actually break down. We have some reasons for that later on, I'll talk about. Okay, so these are things. The last one here, just Navier-Stokes, because I know some people have seen these types of things. And if you do not correctly think about noise, this type of a fuzzy picture for flow past a cylinder, this is going to break down at like 0.5% to 1% noise. You will be unsuccessful at recovering Navier-Stokes from this. Whereas, if you're using the weak form, you can go up to 20% before things start to get a little fuzzy. Okay, so let's talk about so those are interesting results, right? Being able to transform shag carpeting into an equation is pretty cool. And so what I want to talk about is what are some of the techniques and advances that are going into WSINDy that really combine to make this so effective. Okay, and here is a picture. This is just the Vanderpool oscillator. And this is actually the no noise case. Okay, so this is no problem with noise. And this was the first inkling that we really had that something interesting was going on. So this is just so the first test functions we used were these piecewise polynomials, because you think about the weak form. Where does this come from? This comes from, the generalized theory of distributions, all the, the Fields medal to Schwartz in the 1950, to Lax and Milgram, and, things that led to the finite element method, right? Again, solving the equation, the finite element method. Piecewise polynomials figure heavily in that. You take your graduate class in finite elements. This is what they're going to talk about. So of course we started with that, right? I mean, this is what Grigoriev did. This is what Garikapati did. They're all, we're all doing the same thing to start with. But one of the things that we noticed here was that as you crank up the order P of this thing, if you go past what you would need. So the whole issue being, okay, well, what if I only have, say, a third or a fourth derivative in my library of potential, my feature list of features of the right-hand side? Well, do I need a test function that has a higher power than 4 or 5? Like, well, what's going on? Well, of course, if you set this way over here, something kind of interesting happens, is that even if you have a library that doesn't need it, you are finding basically machine precision reconstruction of your equation the smoother you make your test functions. So there's something deep going on here that really needs to be, that we've been investigating. And this was the first inkling that was really, that there was something really interesting happening here, is that you could basically get machine precision without having to have the derivative of your data. Okay, and yes, this is a no noise case, but this is where things started. And the same thing happens with the linear 5D, the pendulum, but really the Vanderpool oscillator. It just is illustrating it very well. Okay, so let's see here. So here's a couple other so first step was test function investigation and making sure that the power was high enough. And you can go all the way to 16, and it's really working quite well. So the next thing that really made some speed ups here was an FFT based idea. And if you look at what's happening, you can squint at your weak form equation. You say, wait a minute, that integral there, that's actually just a convolution. That actually can really be done in a very nice way. And so if we make the assumption about creating these test functions such that they're separable multiplicatively, so you basically have test functions for each dimension, time and space, and you're just producting them all together, you can do this convolution amazingly fast, right? Because now you can do FFTs individually and then combine them together and then do the inverse FFT. And it really just, it just works out very, very well. You can even go further computationally and say, well, if I'm dealing with, right now we were using local test functions that are sort of these little, just little humps. If you end up creating global test functions, this is even faster. For the local ones that are sort of just localized, you can actually get away with doing sparse computations, and that'll be faster. And usually if they're not too wide in terms of the support size, you can get like factors of 5 speed ups, which is pretty nice in doing this. But so this is just going to say that there are really some ways to make these things a lot faster if you want to. Okay. The next thing that we did that makes that sort of this WSINDy, we changed a little bit, and this actually helped in a lot of cases. This is sort of something that's looking at the sparse regression and coming up with better ways to do this. This is as I talked to several of the postdocs today, this is a very active area of research. One of the things that we chose is if you first look at the original sparse thresholding, well, it's thresholding on small coefficients. So one of the things we started looking at was also thresholding on the magnitude of the term itself, because we found some situations where large parameters were being identified, but the term itself was small enough so that the overall impact on the system was minimal. And so we could also threshold those away, and that was getting us also even better results for many cases. Not everything, but just many of them. Okay. The next thing that is sort of critical is when you start talking about these sparse regressions, you have this wiggle factor, right? The lambda. Like, what is that? Obviously, and there's a lot of theory out there for this, but if you're trying to do equation learning, questions of how you come up with that, well, we found a kind of brute force way to work it that is really leveraging the fact that we are solving a regression problem, that we are doing it very fast. And so we came up with a loss function, and in essence, we just took a grid search in log space over a whole bunch of lambdas, and you can actually figure out where the minimum of your loss function is. And so just use that for your lambda. Okay, so remove the questions. This is for Kamrad-Sivashinsky, and basically for different noise levels, you can see there's a different optimal of lambda, an optimal regularization parameter, and so it finds one that works really, really well. Those are then you can use that to learn your equation based on your noise level. Okay. Another thing that was really, really important to our overall mental well-being was had to do with rescaling. We found this was actually pretty critical. So this is Korteweg de Vries. And if you know Korteweg de Vries, this is there's traveling waves that happen in here that are the speed's proportional to the size. They have interesting interactions between the waves as they pass through each other. But one of the things that is sort of pops out is this separation in scales. So if you look at the problem here, of course, space goes from -3 to 3, time goes in the order of 10 to the -3, and the value goes all the way up, on the 10 to the 3. And so, if you want to take step sizes, you're looking at 10 to the -6 to solve this numerically. If you just plug this into WEAK-SINDy, that the G matrix of GW minus B that you're minimizing for your regression, the condition number will be a problem. Okay, 10 to the 26, that's a difficult with, current floating point arithmetic. However, if you figure out what the appropriate scale is, and you can automatically get this. It's not super challenging. You just choose it from your library, and using your test functions, you can figure out a scaling. You can reduce your condition number for this scaled matrix to 10 to the 6. Now, that's not amazing. That's not 1, but 10 to the 6 is doable with double precision floating point arithmetic. It actually it'll work, and you'll get good answers. Okay, so we combined our high regularity of the test function. We combined that with speedups for the FFT based, and we combined it with a rescaling, and that's really what allows us to do this. Okay, so computational cost. So the one that is sort of it just sticks out in our mind a huge amount is Navier-Stokes. Okay, so this is roughly equivalent of the flow past the cylinder, a 4-minute YouTube video, right? And taking 50 terms here, 50 potential candidate terms that really should be reduced down to just 4 non-zero terms in the vorticity form of the Navier-Stokes. This is possible on a relatively creaky and old laptop in 12 seconds. Okay, and the sort of the thing that comes up in your mind is how many 100 years did it take us to come up with Navier-Stokes? And now, without really a deep understanding of Newtonian physics and such, we can do it in 12 seconds to get that. So it's really, there are some interesting things that become possible when you have these types of analysis you can do. And you can look over here. We have Invissid-Burgers, Kamrad-Sivashinsky, KDV, nonlinear Schrodinger, porous media, Sine-Gordon, reaction diffusion. The worst one's reaction diffusion, and it's barely taking more than a minute to do on an old laptop. And this is simply running it in MATLAB. And so immediately you think, okay, well, there's ways that you can even accelerate all of these things, maybe different choices of the basis functions, different whatever. There's lots of ways. This table here is we show this table a lot. This is in the JCP paper from 2021, and we've actually figured out ways to even go faster than this now. So let's see. So that's really what was the first generation of WSINDy. What has come next is building on this to see how many different directions can we go with this, because it's really quite interesting. So one of the things that happened was we started thinking about, okay, we'd actually seen a few papers that were grumbling about, oh, well, they need a lot of data. Well, the reason that we needed a lot of data is we were trying to match exactly some previous papers and the benchmarks from like the Rudy paper in Science Advances and the PNAS paper. And so we just chose the same amount of data. And unfortunately, there were some papers that said, okay, well, they need a lot of data. So we were looking, okay, well, what about, let's go the other direction. Let's say an online learning streaming scenario where we have maybe a few snapshots and you can only use those and then you have to throw them away. This is also getting at that question of, there was another criticism of what about parameters that vary in space or time? Well, let's look at this. So here is a 2D wave equation with 10% noise. It is starting at the box in the upper left. So Y is vertical, X is into the screen, and then there's waves that are propagating in this two-dimensional. This is just looking at it as going from time from left to right. So what we did here for this 2D thing was we said, okay, let's take 25 snapshots and let's have a time varying coefficient for the wave speed. And let's switch it between, up and down. And this is just an illustration. We can go more extreme than this and such. But what you're seeing here is that WENDy is grabbing on to the correct, not only the correct equation, but the correct parameter. And it is, all we're doing here is using proximal gradient to learn the equation. But by, basically 1,000 of these iterations, it has learned the equation and it is not letting it go. It has learned the parameter. And even though the parameter changes, it'll, take a minute or take a few iterations to grab onto it again, but it's going to grab onto it and it will hug it. And this will continue forever. One of the really fascinating things that came out of this paper was that the more complicated online learning algorithms that did not work as well as just a simple proximal gradient using the WSINDy to do this. So we were very excited about this direction here, and you can actually see for a 3D wave, I think this one was a 3D with 10% noise also. And this isn't just k equals 25. This is 10% noise, but for the blue, that's k equals 25. This is the error in the parameter. This is the sort of the equation being correct. You can see that just in a few iterations, it grabs onto it and hugs it. And then, 25, 21, 17, how low can we go? Looks like things start to break down when you're using only 13 snapshots in time and just sort of have that moving window running along. Yes, it's sort of staying as errors up here, and it takes a while. Eventually, at 13 snapshots, it does grab onto the correct equation, but it's not a fast process. Whereas with the 25, 21, 17, they're sort of, it's getting it much faster. Okay, so online learning, so data needs are actually much more modest than one would expect. Then use this. We've pushed this further. Interacting particle systems. This is basically, we're just trying to learn. This is a bunch of particles, the Brownian motion particles. So this is stochastic differential equation with the Brownian motion. They're wiggling around, and as the number of particles goes to infinity, we can learn this. We can learn the drift. We can learn the diffusion parameters here. Interestingly, one of the other things that we can do that we did in this paper is we looked at the histograms of the data. So of all these particles, and I wish I could click on the buttons. I've tried, but it messes up on. So you can just imagine a bunch of wiggling particles all, collecting together, moving around. And what we see here is, via looking at the histograms of these particles at each time point, we can actually learn the mean field PDE that describes this. So that's pretty nice that you basically, by taking the PDEs and just histogramming them at the appropriate scales, you can actually get the mean field PDE for this. pushing this even further, one of the really cool things is that idea, if you have a super highly oscillatory, basically PDE, as you go further and further with the weak form, you can actually get the homogenized PDE that is giving you the correct, basically the correct upscaled PDE. So this is pretty impressive. That I thought was really nice that we can basically take these highly oscillatory PDEs and learn the homogenized PDE as we go along. Okay, so let's see. I don't want to run out of time here, so I want to make sure I get to a few more things. So that was the first order interacting particle systems. We pushed it further to second order interacting particle systems, and this is really coming from where some of the funding for this and the resources were looking at cell migration and trying to use to do model selection for cell migration. We discovered some really interesting results here. So this is the standard interacting particle system. You have an alignment potential interacting between two particles. You have a attraction repulsion potential, and then you have a drag. Drag's kind of boring. It's just a drag force. But one of the things we discovered is we started looking at real data of migrating trajectories of migrating cells. And our biochemistry collaborators have, they can follow and track cells as they move around, or communities of cells, was that you would get these kind of potentials. And so you would have this really interesting, the one on the left, which is this attraction repulsion. It was really pushing the cells ahead of it and behind it away, and it didn't really care about what was going on to the left or right. Whereas the alignment potential on the right, it was wanting to align with the cells that were in front of it, and it didn't care what was happening behind. So this is telling you some really interesting things about if you have trajectories and you have trajectories of particles or fish or animals or cells, and you have enough of them around that you can see enough interactions between them, you can learn the rules that those cells are using. Again, pushing this further, what we did, this is artificial data here. We did look at real data, and I'll get to that in just a second, and created some potentials. But using the potentials from the real data, we created 3 different species of cells, artificial cells. And so basically the gray is the spaghetti mass that was given to the weak learning algorithm, which had 3 species intermixed. What we're able to do is for each individual cell, learn the rule, the potentials, the potentials that cell is using to guide its movement. From there, using those parameters, and you can actually classify each of those cells based upon their movements. And so what you are seeing here is starting with the gray mass, and then learning the cells and then sorting them according to a machine learning based algorithm of looking at the parameters, and we figured out a process for doing that. The black curve is the data, and the dotted curve is a forward solve using the learned potentials. And so what you can really see here, I don't even know if there's one where, maybe down here on the teal, it's a little bit off, but for the most part, it has learned the correct potential and it nails it. And not only that, it is sorting it into 3 different species, A, B, and C correctly. So we were very, very excited about this. This is actually the Journal of the Royal Society interface paper. Going further, we actually took experimental data. It's not as clean than our artificial data, but you can see that we are actually learning what the trajectories of the cells, what their choices are based upon their trajectories and how they are deciding to move with the rest of the particles here. Now, some of them have funny jumps because of the image processing to try to say, okay, was this a cell? Oh, there's the different, it's actually switching to a different cell. But for the most part, we kind of have the bulk motion that these cells are going at, and the rules that they're using to move. Okay, so I have just a few minutes left here, so I did want to talk about some forthcoming work. We have one paper that we posted. This is 45 pages of analysis of the WENDy algorithm, and there's a lot of really interesting theory and results that came out. But one of the things that I wanted to just draw your attention to is that we are pushing on how general a form WEAK-SINDy can recover the correct form of the equation for all noise levels. And so this is again, this is multi-index notation. So here's a time derivative. Here's all your other derivatives. And this is for P is 0 and 1. So this is basically saying mass action and whatever derivatives you want, and then or U squared and whatever derivatives you want. So things that fit in here are like the Lorentz equations. Things that fit in this framework are like the Navier-Stokes equations. And so what this is saying is that this is actually proven. It doesn't matter what noise level you start with. As long as you have enough data, you will be able to asymptotically recover the correct equation. That's kind of powerful. Because it's saying, it's sort of the first step towards saying, how much data do I need to figure out my equation? Well, if an equation fits in this framework, you just need, there will be a sufficiency level of enough data to get that. We have pushed this further. Dan and I were talking earlier. This actually can go further than this. This is just trig functions here. There's some non-local and local terms that we can throw around in here. The equation 9, we can get the thing perfectly. Equation 10, as you go beyond this first order and second order polynomials, there's going to be some bias in these weights, but you're still going to get the correct form. Okay, which is, I don't know, there's actually some other really interesting results in the paper, but this was the one that I just wanted to draw your attention to. And then the last thing that I want to point out here is at the core of all of these data-driven SINDy based models is really a parameter estimation problem. Okay, and so we dived into this a little bit. This paper here, which is should be going out in the next week. So what we did was, instead of the way that a lot of the times in the SINDy papers you'll see things stacked up as a whole bunch of different variables, and so you're solving for a matrix of parameters W. If you stretch that out, you of course need to stretch out the right-hand side of all of your different features and different library terms that are in your model. But if you do that, you can look at this and you can see, all right, well, that's my data, but I'm adding noise here and I'm adding noise here. That's an errors and variables regression problem. Okay, so that's different than what a lot of times gets done. But if you correctly, if you go through this process of the errors and variables literature and account for the fact that you have noise here, and it's the same noise, you can go further. And here's some interesting results. And this is just parameter estimation. So now what we're doing is we're getting past that whole pick a parameter. Maybe it's good, maybe it's not. Solve the forward simulation, compare with the data, iterate on that. We are completely bypassing that. Okay, and so what you see here is the blue dots are for the weak form estimation in nonlinear dynamics. The red dots are for doing just nonlinear least squares, like I talked about, forward solver based. Don't worry about the green just a second. This is for Fitsu-Nagumo. And so what we've plotted here is the wall time to do this solve versus the relative error. Okay, and you think about that as a plot. Of course, you want to be toward the lower left. And this is a beautiful illustration. It takes time to do forward solves. Moreover, you need to worry about numerical accuracy. You need to worry about termination tolerances on your nonlinear optimization. And because in essence, the weak form version of this is solving a regression problem, you see it's pretty much taking the same amount of time no matter what, because it's just solving the regression problem. Right. And so, of course, there's, depending on the noise, there's different levels of accuracy you're going to get here. This is with 5% noise on Fitsu-Nagumo. And you can see exactly what it looks like down here. It's not a lot of data, actually, to keep track of this. It's just 2 cycles. And, you could probably use a little more resolution of data around those peaks and the turns that you see there. This is just saying, if you're going from here to here, that's nice. This is the direction you want to go with your optimization problems. One of the things that we even tried, because this was suggested in one of Itai Datner's work, was coming up with a direct estimation process, using their tricks, and then using that as the initial guess for nonlinear least squares. So we said, okay, well, maybe nonlinear least squares will do better if we give it the WENDy iteration, WENDy approximation of parameters. Well, turns out, yes, nonlinear least squares does do better if you use the blue dots to inform the red dots, it gets better, but it still, takes time, right? You're still looking at and this is consistent. A lot of the times we do see 2 orders of magnitude improvement in time, and maybe an order of magnitude or whatever in the accuracy error improvement. So, and let's see the next one. So this one is more of a Lockable-Terra equation. There's a little more spread here, but the message is still consistent that yes, maybe your errors are, maybe comparable to the nonlinear least squares, but the time to do so is substantially better, and you are avoiding any question of numerical accuracy in your ODE solver. You're getting around that completely. The other thing I do have to say is not that we cheated, but we really put the best foot forward for nonlinear least squares here. We are giving it all sorts of good initial conditions on guesses that are close to the true solution. We are, making sure that the step size is calibrated correctly, all sorts of ways to make this good for nonlinear least squares. At the end of the day, you don't need to do any of that over here. There's some questions of test functions, but we have some answers about that, which pay attention to the archive post that'll come out hopefully in less than a week, and we'll answer that one. Okay, and then lastly, before I know I'm a little bit over, but I just wanted to mention there is a ecosystem of a community that this weak form approaches is starting to sort of be created around. In particular, if you look at what Sung-Ha Kang at Georgia Tech is starting to do, they've some of their methods for learning things. They are using the weak form now. That was flattering. They only compared with WSINDy. It was the only one they were having trouble beating, but they do have some really nice results in terms of the trimming that they're doing on the sparse regressions there. Some guys at Oak Ridge, Russo and Lau, they actually put this in even a really interesting theoretical framework of basically it's a reproducing kernel Hilbert space, and they show that WSINDy is this projection operator, and they just get some really nice results using it to show that you can get these surrogate models. There's also some people, Bert Simas and Gurney at MIT in the in operations research. They're using this mixed integer optimization, and we chatted with them a little bit, and they just they're weak form WSINDy plus this mixed integer optimization. This works great, and that's sort of the conclusion of their paper that just came out. So I would encourage you to go look at that one too if you're interested in that kind of work. So summary. This has high computational efficiency. We've done ODE, PDE, interacting particle systems, some basic stochastic differential equations with Brownian motion. It's robust to large, and we have the theory that says that there are equations for which you can have any noise level. If you're allowed to have as much data as you want, you can have, it will work. It will work perfectly. Relatively speaking, if you go in the other direction, it is have modest data needs. The online learning really shows that. And you can try to identify time varying coefficients. And we haven't done it yet, but there's spatially varying coefficients that you could probably sneak in there too. And we are now confident this is rigorous and theoretically sound. And the angle of this that we're kind of excited about now is that this WENDy is accelerating the core of the WSINDy, and we are completely doing parameter estimation with avoiding any numerical approximation of forward problems at all. Okay, so briefly here, just acknowledgements. Professor Vanya Dukic in the applied math department here. She is a computational Bayesian statistician. She has been incredibly helpful with a lot of these, just talking about statistic issues, computation, the interface of computation statistics. The funding has come from a variety of really interesting places for this work. We just got we're part of a DOE Mimic Center, so we are looking for a postdoc if you have any interested students who are interested in this. And then also, of course, I have to thank the people who did all the hard work on this. Is a list of graduate students: John and Harry and Jackie, Sabina, Lewis, Dan, and April. And just to sort of summarize, this has really been Dan and I. It's really been a collaboration, and it's just been us doing this together so far. And it's really just been that's the people that are core developers of it. And then these are the references, and a few minutes over, but that's it. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you so much, David. Super interesting work. Really excited for that preprint that'll come out next week, I hope, or in the next couple of weeks here. Looks like we have a couple questions. how do we want to do this? Let's see if I'll try to unmute people. Oh, or maybe those are clap emojis. Okay, do we have any questions? Do people want to just put them in the chat?
I'll start off with some questions. Really great presentation, David. Thanks. The limitations on the form of the WENDy that don't require numerical differentiation. I was just curious about what your thoughts are about if the right-hand side of your equation is not a total derivative, then you cannot move all of your derivatives onto the test function. So
Sure.
I know there's a lot of classic applied math literature on which forms are total derivatives, and do you have any insight into what kinds of equations can be discovered without numerical derivatives and which kinds require some numerical derivatives still?
I'm going to be a little cagey because we have a way to deal with that, we think. And because so this has come up. We've seen several papers that mention, especially if you are comparing with something like symbolic regression, right? Because you're saying, okay, well, I have a set of atoms that I'm going to, plus, minus, divide, derivatives, and I'm going to explore the space of growing my right-hand sides. And of course, you could very easily come up with an equation that doesn't that is not integrate by participle, right, or total derivative. And we have some strategies we think we can get around that can deal with more of these composite functions and such. But hopefully that will be also written up soon. But I'm going to hold off on answering that question. It's a very good question, and it is central to sort of, I feel, getting wider acceptance of some of these ideas.
Yeah, awesome. It's an interesting problem, and I'll point you to the classic literature on the inverse problem and the calculus of variations and those things. It has some interesting insights. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think we have a question from the chat now from Keith. If your underlying PDE has a saddle point and you want to make sure that the WENDy system is accurate in the neighborhood of the saddle, has there been a study of that problem?
In the neighborhood of the study, there has not been an investigation of that. This is it's a very good point. My take on it is that there is a limitation in the sense of you are limited by what data you have, right? And if you can recover the equation from looking at the saddle point, that's great. But I mean, it's kind of the same. It's like, what if you have a steady state, right? If you have a steady, you can't recover the diffusion equation from a flat line, right? You do need dynamics to do that. So if there is movement, I don't know, I'm not being precise about this, but if there's movement in the neighborhood of your steady state or your saddle point or whatever, then yes. But fundamentally, if you do not have dynamics informing some of the terms, it's going to fail, and the equation you will get out will not be satisfactory. An exact way to describe that and say, oh, okay, well, given this data, and I know I should have other terms in there, and being able to detect when you're near a saddle point or a steady state, there isn't any machinery that I know of right now. But that's something that's definitely, I mean, one of the things that has been really exciting about this is that there's a lot of questions that have just come up naturally, exactly like the one you're asking. We haven't looked at it yet, though. Is that answering your question?
Okay, yeah, great. Let's see, Keith, does that answer your question? I mean, it looks like it probably did. Thank you for that. We have another question in the chat here from Matthew Golden. While you can get machine precision coefficients from the weak form with uniform grid data, this, in my experience, completely breaks if the grid is changed to have any non-uniformity. Is there a good strategy for weak form evaluations on arbitrary gridded data?
I'm going to have to punt in the sense that it's also something that is sort of on a list of a very natural question to ask. our intuition about it is that there is probably a way to adapt the test functions so that it can look at the different scales and correctly deal with that problem. But we don't have a quantitative answer right now. I mean, there's so just to provide the full context here. So we do in the original WSINDy papers, we do have these adaptive grid strategies where but it's not necessarily. So just to clarify, are you asking about a situation where you are given a set of non-uniform points, or do you have the choice of choosing to go beyond uniform to non-uniform?
Matthew can answer this here. Yes, given non-uniform experimental.
Okay.
Experimental
Yeah.
methods.
That's not something that we have an answer for. We have an answer for if given an initial whatever set of points, you could actually find non-uniform points that will give you better answers, but not given the non-uniform yet.
Thanks. And that kind of ties into maybe a related question in some ways of, say that you have, basically you're handed some observables already that are not necessarily in, in this case, the correct grid or an arbitrary grid, but in general, they already have, we talked a little bit about this in our one-on-one, they already come with some basic observation function. In some ways, a lot of the things you were talking about reminded me of, for example, extended DMD and kernel methods there for exploring that space. Is that an interaction that you've thought about and incorporating some of those techniques in order to broaden the space of observables potentially?
No. Sorry. That we haven't. It's one of those things where it seems like there would be some really nice connections with DMD, eDMD, all these things. We have not explored that space yet. Just to be blunt about it, it is something that is definitely one could do. I guess it was one of those things where we felt like a lot of the core questions of what WSINDy was doing, we thought they were sort of to answer those first was sort of the way to do it. But it's time to start connecting with these other what has been done before in the eDMD especially.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that. And if there are no further questions, I think Keith actually had a follow-up question regarding the saddle points. So near a saddle point, there are stable and unstable manifolds which describe the system dynamics. Would WEAK-SINDy be an effective approach to reconstruct these manifolds and hence the dynamics local to the saddle?
I think maybe we should chat more, but I mean, the answer that I keep coming back to is that there has to be some sense of the variation in the solution. And there has to be a relationship between that, the variation in a way that is sort of, I guess, exciting the certain terms in to correctly reconstruct a manifold of some sort. I mean, are you? Yeah, I think this might be better for offline. I don't have a super concise answer right now. I have a couple ideas about ways to think about reconstructing a manifold using WSINDy, but we haven't really looked at like manifold reconstruction. It's always been more just the equation reconstruction.
Okay, thanks.
Does that answer?
Great.
Okay.
I think that does. I agree. I'll follow up with you later.
Okay.
But, it's a beautiful system. It's a beautiful approach.
Thanks. Yeah, Dan and I are pretty excited about it. So it's.
Well, this has been awesome. And I think if there are no further questions, we'll call it. But thank you so much for going through this work. Very compelling results. I think I speak for many people in saying I'm very excited to see future developments in this area. So thank you so much.
Thank you.